Well, thank you, Dr. Herbst, for finding the time to talk with us.
A pleasure.
We were just hoping that you could sort of walk us through the Pragmatica story. It's clearly very complicated, a lot of moving parts, and your sort of insider perspective would be really, really helpful, I think.
Oh, no, my pleasure. I'm so excited about this, and especially the benefit it will have to patients. So we've been running a large public-private partnership for years called the Lung Map, the Lung Master Protocol, where we've had very close involvement with NCI, FDA, the Foundation for the NIH, which has acted as our common broker, all the NCI cooperative groups, community oncologists, and patients. And through that, we've run over 25 trials. And these trials have gotten to all parts of the country because we've had over 700 sites open. We've run these trials, with biomarker-driven components, and also trials in the immunotherapy resistance space. And we've treated over 4,000 patients, or at least enrolled 4,000 patients, treated well over 1,000. So then the question came more recently when one of our trials was quite positive, S1800. This was a trial that in the refractory space, patients with lung cancer, the most common cause of cancer death, who had already failed immunotherapy and been on that immunotherapy for at least 12 weeks. So not the primary refractory patients, but those who had some resistance or a significant resistance to immunotherapy. We found over 160 patients nationwide using the umbrella trial, the Lung Map. And we had two drugs that we used in that refractory population that had come through some phase 1 studies. One was pembrolizumab, of course, a PD-L1 inhibitor, and the other was ramucirumab, a VEGF-R2 antibody inhibitor, both antibodies. And because of this partnership, we were able to get the two companies, Merck and Lilly, to work together. We delivered the drug through the entire National Clinical Trials Network, a true example of intergroup collaboration. And the trial showed with a hazard ratio 0.67 or so that there was an improvement in the patients who got the pembrolizumab ramucirumab versus standard of care chemotherapy, which remains docetaxel or docetaxel ramucirumab or gemcitabine. So we were very excited about this. Of course, Karen Redkamp, the lead author, presented this at ASCO as an oral presentation, and our paper came out at exactly the same time. So we left ASCO really excited. This was a positive trial, and it came out of the Lung Map, which the whole idea of Lung Map was to find these patients and to get these ideas. And we said, what are we going to do next? We now would love to see this combination in practice. So that's where we left ASCO.
So S1800, we're not talking about a registration trial at all. We're talking about progression.
Right, it was a phase 2 trial. The endpoints were progression-free survival and overall survival. Interesting, Paul, we didn't see any difference in progression-free survival. We didn't see much difference in response rate, but we did see a significant difference in overall survival. So that sort of begs the question, as we do the follow-on trial, do we even need to look for progression-free survival? Because we didn't even see it in the phase 2 trial. Do we even need to look at response rate? Sometimes you have a better response rate with chemotherapy than immunotherapy. Really, what we need to do now is confirm the survival. The other key part of this trial is that the toxicity was reasonable, meaning the grade 3-4 toxicities were less than 20-30%. This was a regimen that we have treated a large number of patients on, both in this trial and in other phase 1-2 trials that were company-led. So there really wasn't any need, as we go forward, to worry about more toxicity assessment. Of course, we want to keep an eye out on toxicity, but really all we need now to move forward is to see that this trial in a larger setting, because 150, 160 patients really isn't enough for full survival, we need to go to another study. So that's where we left ASCO, and then we're very fortunate because we're working with Ellen Siegel and Friends of Cancer Research, such an innovative group, and Ellen calls me up, and we've been working closely together for years, and said we have to look at innovative ways to now work with regulatory authorities, work with the NCI, with the FNIH, with FDA. How can we bring this forward? So we started to do two things, and this, by the way, is a large collaboration. It's I was, until just a few weeks ago, I was the overall principal investigator of the Lung Cancer Master Protocol. Now I'm the emeritus PI, but still a special advisor. But this has been a labor of love. We have all these patients. We had all these team players working together. We had Janelle Gray, our lung champion. She's the lung committee leader in SWOG. Karen Redkamp, Konstantin Dragnev. We had our FDA collaborators, our NCI collaborators. We said, what can we do now to get this to patients even more quickly? So there were a couple of things. One, we filed, working closely with our industry partners, Merck and Lilly, for breakthrough designation, and we have that. So this now, a trial that came out of the cooperative groups. I can tell you, Chuck Blanky, our SWOG chair, was thrilled, as was I, that we took this all the way to breakthrough designation. But all that really means is now you have to do another trial to get the drug approved. So then the thought was, as we do this trial, do we want to do a 1,500 patient trial, an expensive trial, a trial where we take these two drugs already approved, for which we already have so much data? Do we want to then do a trial with so many data collections, PFS, response rate, overall survival, or do we want to do something more simple or pragmatic? So in consultation with, a very forward-thinking FDA and NCI, Monica.
Well, Pazder's, wasn't it Pazder's idea, this whole thing? He said that, I believe, at the Friends of Cancer Research meeting.
Yes, this came from Rick Pazder, Harpreet Singh, working with Ellen and the Friends, and then of course very immediate support when we mentioned the idea to the NCI, myself and Dr. Redkamp and Gray involved. When we heard this, we all immediately said, wow, isn't this the way to go? So I had to look up pragmatic, what it meant in the dictionary. And then and then really what it really means is to be more patient friendly, to be more simple. You do trials. I actually led the CTO here at Yale for about 7 or 8 months during an interim period. There's so much data, there's so much regulatory work that's involved in a trial, but we want these trials to be delivered at the point of care. And one of the amazing things about LungMap is these trials got out to diverse populations. We're still not nearly where we need to be, but we had more patients, African American, Hispanic, on the LungMap trial than we did on other NCTN trials. How do we make these trials simpler? We don't need a 50-page document. We want to try to get a 12-page document. We don't need a 40-page consent form. We want a couple of page consent form that patients can read. And the biggest thing was, and Rick Pazder, he kept saying this to us, all you need is survival, guys. You don't need to worry about PFS. You didn't even see it in the phase 2 trial. You don't have to grab all these concomitant meds. You don't have to worry about every little adverse event, just the significant ones. And I'll tell you, Paul, Jacqueline, when we did this, none of us believed him. We were like, we can't do this. Everyone got very nervous. And then when the people that got the most nervous, of course, the pharma companies, because as they should, because they're used to a very precise way of doing this. And it took a while. It took a number of calls, and I was very fortunate to have been part of that. I still remember, as we brought more and more people into the loop. The NCI, by the way, immediately supportive. Meg Mooney, Jim Darshow, that group immediately. Shakun Malik immediately wanted to do it. We had the FDA support, but we had to get everyone comfortable with this idea. So we had a series of meetings, and I know pragmatic trials are going to go across all disease types. We just happen to have the lung trial, which is one of the first. But then the idea was, how do we actually do this? And that's where, again, with Ellen Siegel and the Friends, sort of acting as our broker with the FNIH, we pulled this together. So we have a trial now. We call it S2302, and we're going to call it the Pragmatic Lung Trial. So again, it's going to be a one-touch trial. We care about survival. That allows us to make the hazard ratio a little bit higher. We figure that the randomization will take care of all ills. Rick Pazder, maybe even told you that. We're not going to be as specific in the eligibility criteria. Of course, we need the criteria that got us here, meaning patients who are refractory to immunotherapy with lung cancer, who have been on the immunotherapy for at least 12 weeks. But after that, it's all a much more simpler trial design, easier to identify the patients, collecting many fewer data points. That's going to mean less infrastructure. We want this trial to be done, where people are at, in community practices through the NCORP. And the amazing thing is it's really taken off. So I've been very fortunate. I was at the CTSA meeting, and I heard Bob Califf a few weeks ago. He mentioned pragmatic trials. We just had our AACR Diversity in Clinical Trials course as part of the BMS Foundation Clinical Trials Diversity Program, and Harpreet Singh, spoke about this in her talk. And of course, now we're discussing it here in the Cancer Letter. This sort of idea of more simple trials, one-touch trials focused on the most important endpoint. In this case, survival is the endpoint. I would say that in some cases, it might not have to be survival, but in this case, since there was no PFS in this trial, survival is the endpoint. And
it's sort of fascinating that PFS is not just a lousy a surrogate, but just not a surrogate.
Well, we've seen that more and more, especially with immunotherapy, because remember, the benefits of immunotherapy are at the tail of the curve. If you think of the survival curve with immunotherapy as a hockey stick, and having just recently been to the SITC, there were a number of lectures on this as well. Many patients don't benefit early on, but it's that tail of the curve, the long-term benefit. Now, someday I hope we'll be talking, and I can tell you who benefits early. That's something we're doing here as part of our lung spore. But right now, it is possible that even without an effect on response or PFS, you can have an overall survival benefit. And remember, some of these chemotherapies, docetaxel, which we've been using since I was a fellow, I don't want to tell you how long ago that was, but it was early 1990. In those days, it does cause response, but a great deal of toxicity, and it's not a lasting response. But the immunotherapy tends to have a more durable benefit. And it makes sense, by the way, the whole idea that if you use a vascular endothelial growth factor inhibitor, you're having an effect on vascular flow. For years ago, people have shown that those agents increased chemotherapy and oxygen delivery to tumor. It's very possible we're increasing the immune, warming up the immune environment, and allowing more T cells to get to the tumor. So I'm absolutely thrilled. We had a positive trial, and then everyone sort of jumped on this. In fact, it even exceeded my wildest expectations. We had amazing support and innovations from the FDA. We worked with them to make this happen, but all the regulatory groups, the NCI, the companies, think about the companies. This is a very new thing for them, but I've got to tell you, Merck and Lilly, so willing to be innovative and to take the chance on this new trial design. We have breakthrough designation. We can still do a big trial the old way, but I'm very hopeful that this trial, it might not come out positive. We have to do the science, but I think it will help patients. We'll get this combo to patients. It is randomized, so some patients will get a control, but we'll get this done quickly. What good are these drugs if we don't get them to the right patients? We don't get it to them quickly and safely. Safety, of course, is a major issue, and I'm very excited to be part of the Pragmatica team with some of the people I mentioned to you earlier.
Absolutely. And so with such a big team and so many partners, who actually holds the IND?
Well, the IND for this will be held by SWOG. So the way the Lung Master Protocol works now, and I'm very proud of that. When we started the Lung Master Protocol, it was a SWOG trial, and then what we did is we moved it over and we brought in all the cooperative groups. And now, as I've left it, it's truly a partnership with an amazing governance. When you have a partnership like this, you need governance for each of the groups, whether it be the ECOG Akron, the Alliance, the NRG, SWOG. They all hold leadership positions on the different committees. But now what we've decided is for this trial, it really is outside of the lung map. It's a different type of trial. So SWOG has taken the lead on it just because it came out of a trial that was SWOG-led, myself and Karen Rebkamp, and actually a large call to Valley Papadimitriopoulos, my good friend and colleague who worked on this before she left for industry. So this trial got started, and then the SWOG is going to hold the IND and run the study, with very close cooperation with all the other parties, and that's important because even SWOG wanted to make sure they had the assurances that this lesser data collection would have the approval of the FDA, and the FDA has been very supportive. The other thing to keep in mind is there's no other therapy in this space, so it's critical that we're in a space now where there is nothing right now that I know of to give to this group of patients. If there had been something here, it might have affected the bar. But right now the bar is not, I wouldn't say too low, but it's not really high. It's we and that's what made it possible to do this as one of the first demonstrations of a pragmatic trial. And so we call it Pragmatic Lung trial. and SWOG is, Chuck Blanke and the team there. Mary Redmond is our lead statistician, just done an excellent job with this. Will really help us to make this happen.
Yeah, can we talk about randomization for a moment? Because FDA recently, ODAC voted down a trial that had a synthetic control arm, and in this case, this is actually randomized. This is not a standard approach to real world evidence. This is actually, these two drugs versus chef's choice. So it's kind of an interesting. What does it say to you as a clinical trialist?
Well, I love the idea of real world data, and but as opposed to retrospective, this is prospective. You're right. It's a randomized trial, so it's a true application of doing a real world trial in a prospective randomized way. I think what you're alluding to is the control arm is dealer's choice, but we actually have some data from our 1800 trial that about 75% of people will use docetaxel ramucirumab, which is, but they don't have to. Some will use docetaxel, some will use gemcitabine. We were torn on this, and the feeling was it will all come out in the randomization. Trial's still going to be close to, or maybe a little bit north of 1,000 patients, and the randomization will take care of it. And you know what? If it doesn't, and there isn't a significant benefit, how worthwhile is this anyhow? And this is going to have to be chemotherapy from 20, 30 years ago. So we've left it. And that's the thing that's different, and it does make some people have palpitations. That it's not exactly a conformal thing, but I think that it will all come out. There'll be enough patients. Some will have this or that, but it should all wash out. Now, will the difference that we see here be as big in terms of hazard ratio as we saw in the other trial? It might not be, but the FDA has told us that they'd be willing to consider anything in the 0.78 range, maybe in the middle, which is what came out of ASCO's guidelines years ago. I was part of that committee for lung cancer. So we're hoping to, you don't have to, with each trial in immunotherapy, see a hazard ratio of 0.6, 0.5. This is now in refractory immunotherapy. So even if we were close to 0.8, but if we had significance based on the statistical design, I think we'll be okay. But again, it's an experiment, but it's a good one because, as Ellen Siegel constantly tells me, and she's been my mentor for years, we're helping patients. We're getting drugs to patients faster. That's the goal, and we're asking questions at the same time. Can't tell you how amazing it is. The FDA is our regulator here, so they have to keep a bit of a distance, but they've given us tremendous advice. They've not told us what to do. It's a SWOG IND trial, but the entire collaboration has come together. The other thing I want to point out is we have the buy-in of all the other cooperative groups. It's a competitive space out there, Paul, Jacqueline. There are many trials, but we're hoping that because we're using the NCTN network, they'll be quick to open. Cancer centers right now, our cancer center here at Yale, Eric Weiner and I, the grant's going back in. We want to have clinical trial accruals. We want to have pragmatic trials that we can get to the community. We're thinking about COE and other things. All these are going to be very, very critical, to make sure that we get accrual, and that's going to be on us. We talk about that each week. We have a meeting each week. We have to make sure that this accrues, and that's why I'm so glad that even a little bit before it's fully open, you're talking to me about it. But then as it moves forward, we're going to need social media. We're going to need to run seminars or go out to the point of care. I've run trials over the years, and sometimes you have to have regional meetings. Now we can do them somewhat by Zoom, but we're going to have to make sure coordinators and others are aware of the trial. The PIs and the team of PIs have to be available to help patients and caregivers when they have questions about the trial. But hopefully there'll be fewer questions because there are more limited eligibility criteria. There's more limited data collection. It's pragmatic.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because we're not going away on this story. We will keep on it for as long as it takes. So it's probably one of the most important stories we've done in years, and it's huge. So one question is the power calculation. you went for a very high power calculation. How does that
Well,
work?
well,
Why?
we I don't want to say the exact numbers because it's still not fully approved or out there, but we did go a little bit higher than we normally would. However, it became an issue of sample size versus working with what would be acceptable to the companies providing the drugs. Let's not forget we have two companies providing both drugs and support for this trial. And we didn't want to go too high. We also want to have a sample size that allows us to do the trial in a reasonable way. We're not going too high. This will have to come in 0.8 or less to be significant. But we've powered it, so that would be the case. But we're not shooting for something much lower. We
But why? I guess I was asking why do you need it? I'm certainly, I don't have an opinion. I don't feel entitled to one, but why did you think you needed more power calculation, more power?
Well, you want to have again, I'd rather not discuss details till the trial's got the stamp of approval. But you want to have, you have to look at your alpha and beta, and you want to make sure you have, you want to do a trial with, 85-90% power, right? We're meeting all the standards that have currently been applied, to intergroup studies. The trial, again, where we've targeted a hazard ratio that's reasonable to be clinically significant in this setting.
Yeah.
But where we're not going for as low as we might, if in another study with a larger sample size, because we wanted to make a moderate sample size that would allow for it to accrue in a reasonable period of time. But again, when the trial finally opens, we'll put that out. But I think until the trial is publicly available, I'd rather not comment on the exact statistical design. But I can assure you that it's been reviewed with intergroup, with the CRB. CTEP has it's gone through CTEP, the NCI Lung Steering Committee. It's been through the CTEP IRB, and it's been reviewed by the industry and the FDA.
Yeah, no, I certainly, that's kind of why I knew enough to ask the question, but I guess what is interesting here is that I guess you do want to look at the subsets with a more positive, more and you are looking for more clinical significance here too. So that's actually
right. But we have limited subset analyses, and the one thing we're looking for in this trial is survival. It's funny. I don't know if Rick told you this, but every time we, as a group, would talk to Rick, and you know how we are as investigators. Oh, let's add a squamous subset. Let's add an add-on. He just like ready to pull his hair out. He said, "Stop it." He would tell us, just keep it simple. It's like the old keep it simple, but again, once the trial's done, we'll have the data and we can analyze it. Of course, we're in an era where, look, I'm hoping that someday there'll be more molecular markers we can use, either in the blood or the tissue, and we will get tissue, the initial biopsy on this patient, but there are not going to be any new biopsies. If you require a new biopsy in a trial, you've immediately cut away 30-40% of the people to get the study, to have to get them in to do the biopsy. They might be sick. And this is refractory lung cancer. So we're not requiring new biopsies, but we will have the old biopsies we can go back to. And we can always look at subsets, but we're not powering for different subsets. We're powering it for survival, and then everything else will be an additional analysis later on. But really, if this trial hits survival, this becomes a standard of care. If it doesn't, it's a model for future trials, and it might not. I'm hopeful it will, but then we've got other things coming up the pipe. We've got so many. The amazing thing now is we've never had more companies and groups come to us at LungMap with new drugs and studies. I think coming out of the pandemic, there are so many drugs being developed, in the lab, and I've never seen more new drugs or combinations or mechanisms. And I'm hoping the LungMap will help both with trials like this in the immunorefractory population, but also targeted, looking at, new biomarkers and new mutations. And then ultimately, Paul, Jacqueline, we're going to personalize immunotherapy, right? So at some point, we'll do even better than this trial. We'll know who will benefit most from pembrolizumab, ramucirumab, because we'll have a marker to predict it. Right now, we're going to have to learn retrospectively from this data set, from the LungMap trial, from the Pragmatic trial, and look backwards.
It's fascinating to see that there's where we are in terms of the politics, political structures in oncology now, and because there's Monica in charge of NCI who really gets it. There's Rick, whose idea this is. Swag jumped in, you jumped in. Ellen Siegel totally understood it immediately and was brokering it. So it's kind of an interesting time to try something completely different, which this is.
Right. Well, the NCI, even before Monica got there, was behind it. But gosh, Monica couldn't be more excited about it. I've known Monica since I was an intern at the Brigham, and she was a senior resident. And I've spoken to her about this, and she's been nothing but supportive. By the way, as the Alliance chair, she actually helped keep LungMap going all these years. So I think she probably will see this as something that she helped grow, and now can take it to the next level. And we have to do something different, because immunotherapy has changed as one example, has changed the world in lung cancer. But we still have so many people who are succumbing to the disease. And now the next step's not going to be easy. It's going to require some science. It's going to require scientifically guided trials and then validation. And we can't validate everything with a big phase 3 trial. We don't have enough patients as far as people, and also patients as far as waiting for those results. And we don't have enough money, and we don't have enough resources. And also, it's the diversity issue. And this is something I've been very passionate about.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
And so I just it's very fresh in my mind. I've been working with Robert Wynn and Shore, and as part of the BMS Foundation, we just welcomed our next group of about 60 scholars into a 2-year cohort where they start with a course on clinical trial design and diversity, and then they're funded over the course of 2 years through the BMS Foundation, and Gilead has gotten involved now to help them put trials into diverse populations. And I spoke about the LungMap trial and about this trial as an example of how we can be more diverse. Why? Because trials like this, being less complicated, less expensive, they can be run at the point of care. Now, I'm sitting here at Yale University. I've been at MD Anderson. I've been at Harvard. I've been at Sloan Kettering in my career. Not everyone can get to those places. It's a very different population you see when you go to community practices. So by having trials where the coordinator doesn't have to read 50 pages, he or she gets 10, 50, 12 pages and sees the trial. It's using 2 drugs that they already know how to use. We don't have to put 10 pages, Paul, of how to use pembrolizumab. They just go to the package insert. They go on the computer. These are the types of trials that will allow these trials to be run at the point of care where people don't have the resources to travel, to park in a parking lot, to get in a car. But at least they can get there with the doctors they trust, and they can get these trials. This won't be the whole answer, but I think it will help. And we've already seen on the LungMap trial increased diversity. We've seen an increased rural population. So if you look at the map of people who have gone on the LungMap trials versus the map of all trials for lung cancer in the US, you can see the middle of the country gets filled up because rural populations, people that live far from major centers, can get on these studies. So this pragmatic trial is Pragmatic-Lung trial 1, but I hope that when we next talk, there'll be 2 or 3 of these. And then I also know there's talk of one melanoma right now, and I know the GI group is talking about it. This is going to be the way to do it. More simple trials, real world, randomized, but getting it out to the entire nation, because that's how we'll get more diverse people. What good are these drugs if we don't get it to the patients that need them?
Right, and Monica was very clear on this at the Friends meeting. She basically said, "This is it. This is an example of how we're going to do this, or how we're going to reorganize."
It's amazing. I was watching. I was in Santa Monica at the diversity course, so I couldn't be there. But it was great to see Monica and Rick and Ellen all discuss this, and it clearly, having everyone focused together, whether the trial's positive or not, it's a step in the right direction, because it's the way we need to do these studies and help patients with all cancers, lung cancer being just the first one. But very happy, and we're very happy this came out of LungMap. We have several other what we call sub-studies moving forward. Perhaps we can do the same thing with them once we get the results, if possible.
Yeah. What about just this idea that there people on clinical trials generally do better on either group because they're in clinical trials. There's some selection that goes on, self-selection as well. in this case, you're really getting people who are sicker, people who are less wealthy, people who are in worse shape. So this kind of is an interesting idea.
Hence the reason why the hazard ratio target has to be a little bit higher. But
Well,
but also you're absolutely right. This is going to be much more real world, and you know, we have to account for that. But I think that's the whole reason to do this, that we can get people on trial, you know, and hopefully the randomization will take care of that. We've discussed that with Rick and Harpreet and others, and the feeling is the randomization should take care of that. You know, remember, oncologists tend to be, you know, again, I want to be careful here, but I think oncologists, just because of the level of training and because, look, how many drugs have been approved in the last year in oncology, in the last 5 years, have to stay up on the data and have a little bit more updates than maybe other specialties, certainly an internist. So we're hoping that at least the fact that these are oncologists who run trials, they have enough wherewithal, enough thought to make a choice. You know, there are people who shouldn't go on studies, who shouldn't get more therapy. I actually just had lunch with Vince DeVita and we were discussing this. Appropriate patients should be actually literally 10, 20 minutes before this, I got back. Some people should go on clinical studies, but some people shouldn't be treated. And I'm hoping that most people will. Some might not have the ability to make that determination, but hopefully that will come out in the randomization. Again, patient safety comes first, but helping patients with these new drugs is the reason we're doing these studies.
What can you think of? This is our last question, at least mine, is what about other indications that you can see right away where you can do this? Is there, like, you mentioned 2 possible, colorectal and melanoma. Are there other indications to try this approach, Pragmatica?
I think it would all depend on, you know, where there's results like this, where there's a need for some validation of an important question, where a phase 2, you know, randomized study, or maybe it could even be a very good phase 2 single arm study shows some promise. I think this could be open for any tumor type. I just mentioned the other 2 because I know people have asked me about it and there's some talk about it. But, you know, certainly areas where immunotherapy works, but, you know, there's refractory disease. This is melanoma is one, you know, renal would be another. You know, colorectal is a disease where immunotherapy works, but not that well. I think any area is really open for it. I think, you know, people will be watching our trial. You know, we need to get it open quickly. We need to, you know, to run it effectively and efficiently. We will, and we'll see how it goes. You know, and you know, but I hope this will become the norm. Simpler trials, quicker to open in more diverse populations around the country, and you know, we have the support of the NCI, the FDA, and then most importantly, the support of Ellen Siegel. That's really important. So she's really, the friends have just been so innovative. You know, I got into this, you know, Paul, Jacqueline, about 10, 11 years ago. Ellen Siegel called me up. I had never met her. She said, "Do you want to come and lead one of our workshops on large protocols, master protocols?" And I spoke to her for about 2 hours, and that was the end of my free time. I haven't had any free time in 10 years. But we've been working on this, and it's been really great. And I think we need innovation, caring about patients, how they feel, you know, getting them the new drugs, and then results and rigorous data collection. But now we're doing it in a way that we've simplified it so that it doesn't become so burdensome that many facilities can't run the trial.
Well, this really helps. Is there anything we forgot? Anything we didn't cover?
I just want to say that, you know, I'm here speaking on behalf of, there must be over 100 people. I just gave a talk at the last SWOG meeting, and you know, it's just been such a village of people, you know, to do these public-private partnerships, and, you know, working with NCI and FDA and, you know, the FNIH, you know, is Stacey Adam and the entire group there. It's just incredible, you know, how we've all come together, you know, as a team of investigators. I just want to end by saying that I think it is about the patient, so we need to collaborate. We need to bring the best science to clinical studies and answer these questions in a timely way. And this is one example of how we're trying to do it in a timely and pragmatic way. And I use pragmatic all the time now. I was just at Thanksgiving, I was talking about, we had a pragmatic Thanksgiving. We had it, you know, more quickly. No, but seriously, we have to. it's a good approach. Be pragmatic, but careful and help patients. I'm happy to be a part of this with the entire team.
Well, it's always better to have a pragmatic Thanksgiving than a Thanksgiving with excess data collection.
Right. Too much stuffing or something like that.
So much stuffing. Thank you so much.
That's what we're trying to do. We want less stuffing.